Hi, and welcome to the Quiz 2 review. This is for English 350, 355. We'll start by talking about combining sentences, also review paragraphs, testing paragraphs, all this in preparation for the quiz on Monday. So we've been discussing ways to combine sentences. The thing to remember is when you combine sentences, you just can't pick any word to combine the sentences. You have to think of the logical relationship between the ideas. So let's take this example here. We want to combine two simple sentences. The roads were slippery. There were lots of accidents. Looking at this, we can see that the first sentence probably contains the cause of the second accident. So we want to find ways of combining the sentence that show this cause-effect relationship. There are different ways of expressing cause and effect. The first way I've used here, the roads were slippery, so there were lots of accidents. What we're doing here is we're using a comma and a coordinating conjunction. The coordinating conjunctions, those are the things we call fanboys, for, and, nor, etc. So that's a pretty straightforward way of combining sentences, probably the most commonly used in everyday speech. Another way of combining sentences is to use a semicolon plus either a transitional expression or what's called a conjunctive adverb. The roads were slippery, semicolon, consequently, there were lots of accidents. Consequently is a conjunctive adverb, just like however, furthermore. Here's another conjunctive adverb that makes sense given the meaning of the sentence. The roads were slippery, therefore there were lots of accidents. Now we have a transitional expression. The roads were slippery. As a result, there were lots of accidents. Notice how you put the semicolon at the end of the first simple sentence. Then you have either your conjunctive adverb or your transitional expression, and then you have a comma after that. Okay, the last two sentences, here we're using dependent words to combine the sentences. Because is a dependent word. It triggers a dependent clause. Because the roads were slippery, there were lots of accidents. Or you could also put the other sentence in first place. There were lots of accidents because the roads were slippery. I'd like to talk a little bit more about using these dependent words to combine sentences. So here are the two sentences you saw on the previous slide. You could also have said since. Since implies the same thing as because. Since the roads were slippery, there were lots of accidents. Here's the rule to remember. If you have one of these dependent words and a dependent word because, since, although, or even though, you should never use a semicolon to combine sentences. The reason for this is when you use a dependent word, you create a dependent clause, and you can use semicolons only when you combine two independent clauses. So notice here we're not using the semicolon, we're using a comma when the dependent clause goes in first place. This slide shows you a little bit more about dependent clauses. So dependent clauses begin with a dependent word, although. Although I grew up in France. They must be linked with an independent clause, otherwise they're fragments. Although I grew up in France, I am a U.S. citizen. Dependent words consist of subordinating conjunctions and relative pronouns. So here's our list of subordinating conjunctions. And here are more dependent words. These are called relative pronouns. So the thing to remember here is you never want to combine parts of sentences that start with these words and another sentence using a semicolon. You don't need a semicolon to combine them. Here's some comma rules associated with using dependent clauses. When the dependent clause is first, you add a comma. No comma is needed, however, when the independent clause is first. And again, here's this rule that I would really like you to Remember, never use a semicolon between the two clauses when one clause is dependent. So here are the answers to the worksheet that I distributed in class. And as I mentioned to you, my quiz questions will be taken from these questions. So here's a list of the corrected sentences. Note that in some cases you could use different ways to connect the sentences, and that's the reason for which you won't have a multiple choice quiz. This is a quiz where you write out the sentence, and as I just mentioned, there can be more than one correct answer. So let's look at a couple of these. Speech is silver, but silence is golden. So the important thing to remember here is you're trying to illustrate contrast between the two phrases, and that's the reason for which you use but. You could also use yet. Number 2, the house was dark, so she decided not to ring the doorbell. Number 3 uses a kind of an old-fashioned coordinating conjunction. He signed a long-term contract for he did not want to lose the job. So for is an old-fashioned way of saying because. Notice the structure in all these sentences. You have a comma and then you have your coordinating conjunction. As I mentioned in class, a comma is not strong enough on its own to unite two sentences. You also need that coordinating conjunction. If you don't have the coordinating conjunction, it's what we call a comma splice. I recommend you look at these other examples and make sure that you understand the way they've used to connect these sentences together. Here are the answers to the questions on run-ons. So let's take a minute to look at these. Number 1, the soft drink 7-Up originally got its name from its ingredients. Notice how the textbook is combining the sentences. They're not. They're just putting a period in there and using an uppercase I. In class, when we discussed this, we said maybe you could use however in there. So the soft drink 7-Up originally got its name from its ingredients. Semicolon. However, comma, it is a blend of 7 natural flavors, not just lemon and lime. In number 2, the textbook again does not use a joining word or a coordinating conjunction. They're just putting an uppercase T in here. In class, we discussed using a transitional expression. In fact, scientists have a theory about the different sizes of our toes, semicolon. In fact, they believe the smaller outer toe allows us to balance more effectively. That would work fine. Number 3, here we have a dependent word. A burnt out light bulb makes a rattling sound when shaken because the filament has broken, causing the bulb to fail. So you could also say since, that would work fine. Number 4 is entirely correct. The command sick, which is used to instruct a dog to attack, is a variation of the word seek. So just breaking this down for a second, your simple subject in the sentence is sick, and then you have a linking verb, is. Okay. These words between the commas, this is a clause using which, the relative pronoun, to start the clause. Please have a look at these other sentences and see if you agree with the answers. Here you have additional responses to those run-ons. You can see questions 9 through 17 on this page. The last 3 questions were cut off. I'm going to tell you the answers to those. So to number 18, the skin over our elbows is quite wrinkled, while the skin over our knees is much less so. That is correct. You're using a combining word, while, a dependent word. That sentence is fine. 19, only female mosquitoes bite. Semicolon, in fact, male mosquitoes do not even have a mouth able to pierce skin. 20, milk gets just as cold in a refrigerator as water. Semicolon, it just doesn't feel as cold in the mouth. Our final topic testing paragraphs. Remember that when you write effective paragraphs, you have a topic sentence that lists both the topic and either what's called the controlling idea or the main idea of the paragraph. You have to provide evidence to support your topic statement. You need a summary sentence to wrap up the paragraph. And then you also need transition words to explain to your reader where you're going with your ideas. So on the quiz on Monday, you'll be given a paragraph and you'll be asked to identify the topic sentence, insert transition words, and also provide a summary sentence if there isn't one in the paragraph. Let's work on an example. So here's the paragraph that we'll work on. This is from page 71, 72 of your text. There are 2 other paragraphs along with this. I recommend that you analyze each one following the process that we'll use right now. Let's read the paragraph. A survey of the history of cigarette advertisements shows how tobacco companies have consistently encouraged people to smoke. One of the earliest television ads showed 2 boxes of cigarettes dancing to an advertising jingle. Many people liked these ads. Other advertisements were more subtle. Some were aimed at specific audiences. Marlboro commercials with the rugged Marlboro man targeted men. Virginia Slims made an obvious pitch to women by saying, "You've come a long way, baby." Salem, a mentholated cigarette, showed rural scenes and targeted people who liked the freshness of the outdoors. Kent, with its micronite filter, appealed to those who were health conscious by claiming that Kent contained less tar and nicotine than any other brand. This claim was not entirely true. Other brands had less tar and nicotine. Merit and other high tar and high nicotine cigarettes began to use advertisements that were aimed at minorities. Cigarette companies responded to the national decline in smoking by directing advertising at young people. Camel introduced the cartoon character Joe Camel, which was aimed at teenagers and young adults. So let's break this down. So the topic of this paragraph, obviously something about tobacco companies. The controlling idea, or the main idea, is that they've used cigarette ads to encourage people to smoke. And they provide some really good evidence of this. Marlboro targeting men, Virginia Slims targeting women, etc. So the topic sentence, I think we can all agree, is that very first sentence. Let's underline this sentence. This is what you'll have to do on the quiz. So here we go, we're underlining that. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about whether any of the sentences in this paragraph are not relevant to the controlling idea or the main idea. So again, main idea is how tobacco companies have encouraged people to smoke. So one of the sentences, let's see, the third sentence, many people like these ads. Well, no, the emphasis on the paragraph is how the tobacco companies encourage people to smoke. So let's get rid of this, many people like these ads. Okay, further down, there's, we kind of get off track again when the text says that this claim was not entirely true. Other brands had less tar and nicotine. We're going to cross those out because, again, that would be relevant to a paragraph on, say, whether there were accurate claims in the advertisement. So this is sort of outside the topic area. So keep saying to yourself, the topic is how they're encouraging people to smoke. It doesn't matter whether their claims are true or not. It's the idea that we're encouraging men to smoke by having Marlboro men, women to smoke by having these Virginia Slim ads. Something else we have to do now is see whether we could add some transitional words that could help the reader follow the argument. So right here, we could insert, for example, Other advertisements were more subtle. Some were aimed at specific audiences. For example, Marlboro commercials with a rugged Marlboro man targeted men. Here we could add, in contrast, Virginia Slims made an obvious pitch to women by saying, "You've come a long way, baby." Right here, we could add, in addition, Salem, a mentholated cigarette, showed rural scenes and targeted people who liked the freshness of the outdoors. Right here, we could say, similarly, Kent, with its micronite filter, appealed to those who were health conscious by claiming that Kent contained less tar and nicotine than any other brands. Here we could add later. Later, Merit and other high tar and high nicotine cigarettes began to use ads that were aimed at minorities. Here we could say, eventually, cigarette companies responded to the national decline in smoking by directing advertisements at young people. A little "for instance" here would provide the example. For instance, Camel introduced the cartoon character Joe Camel, which was aimed at teenagers and young adults. Finally, we need a summary sentence. You could have something that would be like, as these examples show, tobacco companies have encouraged people to smoke. So just to get back to the main topic here, or you could obviously have something else. As these examples show, cigarette companies have undertaken significant advertising campaigns to get people to smoke despite the health risks. So any of those sentences would effectively provide a summary sentence that just relates back to the topic sentence and makes your reader appreciate just how unified your paragraph is. All right, that concludes this review. Good luck studying.